Hello, friends. My name is Jennifer Long, and I currently pastor at Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Corning, New York.
And I'm Steve Langford. I'm a retired elder in the United Methodist Church, living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
And we're going to look at First Kings today and hear some about the wisdom of Solomon.
And so today we focus upon Solomon, again, one of the stories for which he is best known. So 1 Kings chapter 3 from the New Revised Standard Translation. Now Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, only he sacrificed and offered incense at the high places too. Now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the principal high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I should give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and in uprightness of heart toward you. You have kept for him this great and steadfast love and have given him a son to sit on the throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, although I am only a little child. I do not know how to go out or to come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. So give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this, your great people? And it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. So God said to him, because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, riches and honor all of your life. No other king shall compare with you. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commands as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your life. And then Solomon awoke, and it had been a dream. So he came to Jerusalem, where he stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and he offered her burnt offerings and offerings of well-being, and provided a feast for all of his servants.
Later, two women who were prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, "Please, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then, on the third day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth. We were together. There was no one else with us in the house. Only the two of us were in the house. Then the woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. She got up in the middle of the night and took my son from beside me while your servant slept. She laid him at her breast and laid her dead son at my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my son, I saw that he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, clearly it was not the son that I had born." But the other woman said, "No, the living son is mine. The dead son is yours." The first said, "No, the dead son is yours and the living son is mine." So they argued before the king. Then the king said, "The one says, 'This is my son that is alive and your son is dead,' while the other says, 'Not so, your son is dead and my son is the living one.'" So the king said, "Bring me a sword." And they brought a sword before the king. The king said, "Divide the living boy in two, then give half to one and half to the other." But the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because compassion for her son burned within her, "Please, my lord, give her the living boy. Certainly, do not kill him." The other said, "It shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide it." Then the king responded, "Give the first woman the living boy. Do not kill him. She is his mother." All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered and stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice. Boy,
God.
that's a lot too, isn't it?
Oh, wow. That is a lot.
I was reflecting on the fact that when we had talked about David, that we really talked about the idea of there are no angels, there are no devils, and I wondered how that leads to wisdom.
Wow. That leads us beyond our common ways of thinking.
Yeah.
And that leads us to a different way of then seeing life and relating. What strikes me is how Solomon expresses a sense of inadequacy. You've made me king in my father's place, and I'm yet just a young boy. I'm only a little child. I do not know how to go out or to come in. I don't have what it takes to do this job. It speaks of his sense of being overwhelmed.
That's interesting. I don't know that before we looked at it today. I mean, I'm sure I've read it, but I don't know that I noticed it. One of my favorite texts is from Jeremiah, where God says, "Do not say to me, I am only a youth, for wherever I shall send you, you shall go, and whatever I command you, you shall speak." Okay, that's how I memorized it as a teenager. So it's probably not this version, um, but that sense that God's not limited in who God will work with. Um, God will work with David, whether he is slaying Goliath or sleeping with Bathsheba. David will work with Solomon, whether he believes he's got what it takes or not.
Yep.
Um,
And again, it is a reminder that when we partner with God, it is not about our adequacy. See, it is about God's adequacy, what God provides us. And
gosh,
so, out of that sense of being overwhelmed about ruling as king, he asked for wisdom, an understanding mind.
yeah.
But notice why he asked for it. It says, "Give your servant an understanding mind to govern your people, to discern between good and evil," so that the focus of the wisdom was for the benefit of the people. That's the attitude of a servant king.
That's also the how Israel has been understood from the beginning. You know, the covenant was Abraham was you are blessed to be a blessing. You're
Yeah,
not just blessed for the sake of yourself, it's for the sake of others. Um, I mean, I don't mean that to say you are blessed for others to the exclusion of yourself. Um, but
but
this
the
blessing is bigger than just you.
the the blessing is not just in what we receive. The blessing is in what and when we share what we receive. Today's culture, the idea is the blessing is in what we receive. And that, of course, that opens the door to the prosperity gospel.
That's cool. Yeah.
But going back, as you said to Abraham, the concept is the blessing is not just in receiving, but it is in the sharing of it, so that we become a blessing to others. We become a channel.
This for this reading in the narrative lectionary actually has verses 10 through 15 as only optional. But I really appreciated those verses, and was important to me that they get read this morning for two reasons. I really love the language of I give you a wise and discerning mind.
Mm-hmm.
I just I like the idea that wisdom doesn't just show up as wisdom, that also it's something you need to think on. And that discernment is a piece of that, that
Yeah.
thinking through and reflecting on it
Yeah.
is
And
part of that.
and what it reminds us of is of the need to be thoughtful as people rather than reactive as people. Our basic human nature is not to think, it's to react and to use our thinking to justify our reaction as opposed to letting it govern our response.
And
Yeah, a wise and discerning mind. Yeah.
that I think that's there are times when that ability to react is useful. If a car jumps a lane and it's coming toward me, it is useful for me to react quickly and not think.
Absolutely. It,
Um, but do I have any flexibility in how I live out my humanity to be thoughtful?
Yeah.
Because I wish this wasn't true, but I think there are situations that can come at me or other humans that can come at me that it feels as scary as the car that jumps the lane and is coming at me.
Yeah, we see threat in multiple forms and shapes, and that threat stirs that reactivity. But the thing is when we are functioning out of the reactivity, we're not functioning out of our thinking. It literally, the thinking part of the brain is shut down.
I think for me, the challenge, there's always a challenge with that to like, I mean, sometimes, Steve, I feel like there's not much I can do about that. So
Yeah,
the challenge to say, all right, like that stirred something up in me, and I responded out of stirring instead of out of thoughtfulness. And I'm I'm always trying to go, can I then take that and go instead of like I feel like I've there's a part of me that wants to be sad and sorry and I can never do this and this is too hard. But also wonder if I can the language I've been using for it lately is like, can I take a lather, rinse, repeat approach to this? All right, that didn't work, or I didn't have much. I had zero ability to be flexible. What can I learn?
yep,
Is
yep.
can I be more flexible another time? And
So that we are learning to and gaining self-awareness, self-understanding, and that allows us to be aware then in the midst of the reactivity so that we can take a different response.
at least that's the hope. Uh,
That's the objective. That's the objective. Now, recently I stole something from another author and posted it on my professional Facebook page that said, when we react, we repeat the past.
oh, that's interesting.
When we thoughtfully respond, we create a different future.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, if all we ever do is react, we just keep repeating the past, duplicating the past. So it is in this wise and discerning mind, learning to be thoughtful.
That's really interesting. In that same section, there was also what I just think is great is I give you what you have not asked.
Yeah,
And for me, that as a pivot point for reflection is really interesting. What have I gotten that I have not asked for? Um,
yeah,
where has it come from? I feel like I could look at that through the lens of my workplace. I feel like I could look at that through the lens of my family. I feel like I could look at that through the lens of spiritual gifts. Like,
yeah.
God, what are the things you've given me? Where I was like, I didn't want that. I didn't ask for that. Um,
Because we started this journey, this is where God has led us. And in that journey, these are the gifts that have come. Boy, you live in New York. I live in Texas. What's the chance that we would have ever crossed paths? But here God has given us this relationship. Plus, God has brought us to this way of thinking uh, about human behavior that hopefully leads us to some kind of a wise and discerning mind,
yeah.
so that we're just not reacting all of the time.
There's a great song, and I learned it at camp. I think it's a spiritual, but it's "We've come this far by faith,
Mm-hmm.
leaning on the Lord, trusting in God's holy word. God's never failed us yet."
Yeah. Yeah. I love what Solomon says in the first part of his prayer as he talks about God's steadfast, faithful love that did not abandon his father. Even though David sinned, God's steadfast love continued.
Well, and people who might know a little bit about Solomon's future, Solomon's going to have some not some good stuff ahead of him either.
Yeah.
He is a candidate, I think, as good as David is, and probably as good as all the forefathers. Okay, there are no angels or demons in this. Um,
Well, in fact, the story begins by talking about the angel side and the demon side. Solomon loved the Lord and walked in his statutes. However, he also sacrificed on the high places, which would bend to other gods.
yeah, yeah,
And then in all of those marriages, he brought the gods of the wives that he married.
yeah.
So it wasn't a pure relationship. We like to ignore that part, but we like to exalt the angels,
Yeah.
the angel side.
And then, of course, there's always the piece of, and then we see that wisdom lived out in how he judges with these two women,
Yeah.
which I can't, I
And
wish I could tell you I remembered when I learned that story, but I feel like I've known that story my whole life.
well, that's one of the stories we teach in our children's Sunday school or youth Sunday school areas. So yeah, like I said, it's one of the stories for which Solomon is best known, that plus the building of the temple. And what is interesting to me is, and here's what a wise and discerning mind enables us to do, is that Solomon went beyond the content of the conflict. Whose son is it? To the emotional process underneath it. What were the factors pushing it and driving it? And he played off of not the content, but the underlying issue.
But what was really there?
Yeah.
I don't know. I gotta tell you, there is nothing that says, that there was much time. So Solomon's just said, I'm a little child, I can't do this. And then it says later, two women who are prostitutes. And I just find it really interesting that, like, I was a little child, I cannot do this, to, oh, here, I got this.
Yeah.
That happens pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot in that word later then, isn't there?
Yeah, that would be my expectation.
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't the very next thing.
I think another reason I think I've always enjoyed engaging this is that I think it becomes very easy to say, okay, so wisdom is seeing clearly in somebody else's conflict. And for
Yes.
me, the idea of wisdom, like, how do I get, I mean, this story invites me to say, how do I get clear on what wisdom looks like? Because I think it's a good example. I think it's a useful example to illustrate how Solomon was wise. But I do not think wisdom only exists in seeing other. How does it exist in looking at the stuff that I'm involved in my own life?
Yeah. Because how did this wisdom play out in Solomon's life, especially in his relationship with other wives, other gods? That didn't look so wise.
And it doesn't make the gift that he exercises in this moment, doesn't take that away.
No.
Um,
No.
but again, how much easier is it to see stuff in somebody else's life, or to be able to point the finger someplace else and not see it in oneself? For me, that's one of the things I'm reminded of too.
And for us, in the studies that we do, the focus of learning to think rather than react is to keep the focus on us
Yep.
and being able to manage ourselves and our behavior, our responses.
And I think it's also a great example of how I'm much more able, I'm much more able to stay calm when I'm looking at somebody else's story. And it's the greater challenge, and probably also leads to the greater wisdom to work on how it is I'm functioning in that moment. Yeah, I think that, boy, this is not necessarily the direction I've always taken Solomon in.
Well, you're not where you were when you
No,
looked at it in the past. I like the way the story ends, that Israel heard the judgment, they stood in awe because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice. How do you use power? And that is an underlying theme throughout Israel's history, which is what the prophets keep coming back to. How do you use the position you have? And justice here is not that people get what they deserve, but it is power used to serve. That's the Hebrew definition of justice, to advocate for the powerless.
well, and that this story is set up against the David story. Oh, they're set a week apart in the narrative lectionary as one leader who used it in one way and one leader who used it in another way. Both considered great leaders of Israel.
Yeah, both in their own right. Yeah.
Yes, and both in their own right, both in their own ways. And I'm sure there's places where we could see that Solomon's power, but again, that for me, it reinforces that idea. There are no angels, there are no devils,
Yeah.
just humans doing the best they can with what they have to work with.
Yeah.
Um,
And so ultimately, the way Solomon used his power was not just to build the temple, but to build palaces and these huge building projects, so that at his death, the people were sick and tired of the taxes they were paying and the burden they were carrying. So he starts out with the people in mind, but he ends up with his own ego. So again, that learning, that self-awareness and self-management.
Yeah, I was thinking that effort is something that takes place across a whole lifetime.
Yep.
Yeah, it's lather, rinse, repeat.
Yep. Yep.
Um, yeah.
It is.
Another great conversation. Thank you very much for being here and for your thinking. And I don't remember if we discussed who's praying out. Whose job is that?
I'll do the praying.
Yay. I'm so glad to hand that right over to you. Let's go.
All right. And so, like Solomon, we thank you, merciful God, for your steadfast love that never abandons us, for your faithful love that never gives up on us. We thank you for your generosity, that you give us the tools that we need to do the work to which you've called us. But you give us more than that for which we ask and that for which we need. Thank you for the way that you make our lives rich by growing us up in your likeness. So continue to give us your wisdom, that we might learn to use our power to serve. Is our prayer in the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right. I look forward to next week.
Me too. Peace, friends.
Peace to all of you.